around your feet. Slender fungus eats in bed before he goes to sleep.
Hello everybody, welcome at the EDA. I'm Henry Lucas, the chair of the department. And this is the last lecture of this school year covering the sound component. Every year our faculty and students put a list together of who they want to hear speak. And Matmos was on top of the list, but nobody knew them, really. We don't hang out with Björk. But the funny thing is, you go to their website, you send them an email, and they actually email back. So thank you for that, that's great. Matmos is an experimental electronic music duo from Baltimore, Schmidt and Drew Daniel. Schmidt taught at the San Francisco Art Institute, and Drew Daniel is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Johns Hopkins University. But we mostly know them because they brought Björk global fame working on Vespertine and Medulla. They work with a lot of different musicians. They brought two today. They were here, I think, a couple of months ago at SciArc, and their performance included giving somebody a new haircut, and I think it was a mohawk. So we'll never know. But I want to introduce Matmos, and they will perform first, then there's a break, and then they will speak about their work. So thank you for coming, and I'm really excited.
You guys look great. Right, exactly. You aren't SciArc.
I needed help at SciArc.
Were you going to lower the lights more?
Yeah.
They're right there. That's good.
Couples only.
Thank you. You know, we genuinely didn't mean to craft that into one giant song, but that is how it wound up, and that was not intentional. Okay, so now we're going to do this talk, but I personally despise being trapped in places where people do Q&A or talks after they do work, because, anyway, I figure that's why you make the art, so you don't have to talk, but So we're going to take a break, very short, 1 cigarette only, and if you remember how long that is, that long, I'm going to actually act that out. But so we'll meet back here in 4.5 minutes.
So yeah, stick around. You know, we'll talk about ourselves and kind of generally claim that the art does things it doesn't really do. If you want to peace out now, you can just leave now. If you want to stick around, stick around. Sound all right? Did you hear, like, yeah, that's great. Are you breaking this down? No, I'm going to set up to do like PowerPoint now. It's actually your friend? Oh, that guy. He's big Sky. Oh, we got glasses. It's a moisturizer, and Martin actually designed it with this engineer from Sweden. He's just started this new company where he builds gear. And so what this is an external spring rebirth that you can play, and then there's an LFO, which is a really powerful LFO, and you can drive it all with CV. Can you email you guys? Yeah. We've made about 150 of those so far. Yeah, it's a new company based in Baltimore. It's him and this engineer. Yeah, I guess Martin. All right.
Blah, blah, blah.
No.
I was there. Home.
I had 2 different laptops running Ableton separate from each other, so I'm pulling them out of the same one. Martin made the first video that was working live. It's just I think it's easy. No, I mean, I sometimes sample people live. Yeah, I've done pieces where I'm grabbing them live. But really, it's just kind of like easy to play. And it's a little. I used to rent a big performance and it was just transition. That would bring the whole experience.
Hello. Okay. So those of you that are masochists and want to hear people, you know, fillet themselves through discourse, stick around. People
Look out for that symbol.
Yeah, actually, every time we say a funny joke, someone should kick that, I think.
I'll prevent that from
thank
happening,
you.
actually. Here is good.
So people have often compared our shows to cooking shows in the sense that what we try to do is represent the process or the metabolism of the quote-unquote music that we make. And wearing this kind of portable mic kind of gives me that extra feeling of a cooking show. So if I pull out an invisible cake, just kind of nod. Like
But this
you
can
understand.
actually all be yours for installation price of $49.95 a
If you
month.
call now, the tote bag is yours to keep. I am Drew, that's Martin, we're Matmos. We just played a show with our friends Mark Lightcap and Steve Goodfriend, and we want to thank them for playing with us.
Though they're not here.
They're probably outside being rock and roll. In my other life, I am an academic. I am a part of that tribe, and so academics, in order to justify their existence, tend to need to bring to bear external tools, theoretical tools, historical context, in order to exfoliate and generally expand upon their work. Just yesterday, thanks to the good graces of the English department, I gave a talk on the materiality of Renaissance melancholy, and use the Deleuzian concept of the assemblage as a way to think about the materiality of sort of ghostly representations of sadness and mental illness. I'm going to steal a couple of ideas from that talk, primarily because I find the concept of the assemblage helpful as a way of thinking through what it is that we do, and I'm hopeful that in an audience of design students, questions of an assemblage might actually be portable to your work in ways that kind of compositional questions about music aren't terribly relevant, I'm guessing, to the context in which you create. So if there's some corny attempts to appropriate thought about design, just kind of snicker quietly to each other.
I have an audio problem.
Oh, okay.
This is so close to your throat that it's like, which is cool, but
Yeah, we should use one of these for that.
yep, we're gonna.
That thing we're gonna do. I really can't tell you, but it's really perverted. To commence the bureaucratic academic alienation, let's start a PowerPoint presentation, shall we? Two quotes that have been helpful for us in justifying and rationalizing our existence are the following. British improvisers AMM, amazing group. I don't know if any of you guys have listened to their stuff. They started doing these 8-hour-long improvisations in total darkness in the mid-'60s that mostly sound like people pushing chairs around in kind of random ways. That's what a lot of an AMM record sounds like. And they had a great quote, which is that every noise has a note. And I think what is portable about this quotation is that it stages a certain dialectical tension between receiving the raw givenness of a sound, a material sound, any sound, as just a material object moving in space, creating waves that bounce off of the space and produce a complex image, versus note, right? Versus the idea that there are pitches and that real music is the arrangement of pitches. And so this quotation that every noise has a note, I think, is interestingly ambiguous. Does it mean we accept the given of the acoustically immediate real of the material space around us? Does it mean we show up with software, with training, with cultural habits of what is a good sound or a bad sound, and colonize the world of noise for the sake of the empire of music? So is there something inherently imperialistic about this encounter in which you take sounds, chop them up, edit them, frame them, quantize them, repitch them, sweeten them, stack them in octaves, construct what we construct, which is these kind of pseudo-songs, this kind of crypto, demi, quasi-music that is built out of noises, but that is clearly formed as a result of growing up listening to pop music. So it's one helpful quote, I think, for getting at what we take ourselves to be doing. The other one is from crazy Canadian undeniable genius Glenn Gould. And I mean, this is a kind of pat on the back quote. Like, this makes kind of talentless charlatans like myself feel included. A composer is someone who puts things together. That is, am I a composer? Hell no. I couldn't sit at a piano and play Happy Birthday to You. Like, I couldn't do it. There's a great punk band from LA, Red Cross. Anybody listen to Red Cross? Yeah, they're awesome. They had a great punk rock song called Notes and Chords Mean Nothing to Me. And that's literally true in my case. Martin kind of knows a little more.
I had piano lessons when I was 12.
But we really have no right to make music. We have no right to make records and tour and be on Matador, which is stocked with like perfectly talented indie rock songwriters, which we're not. But in this expanded sense of a composition is just literally someone who has taken elements and put them together and created an assemblage. Any arrangement of form is a composition. Maybe that's just insanely sophistical and elastic, but for me, I found it incredibly permissive that we're now at a state with software and with the ease of use and the transparency of a lot of digital environments that we have this sort of control freak fantasy of being able to just show up and make art out of whatever, out of the given. It's incredibly inspiring.
I don't think you need software.
No, you don't. I mean, I started as a punk rock kid reading Burroughs and making a zine out of cut-ups of National Enquirer with scissors and tape. And to me, just transposing the idea of editing from a visual language to a sonic language was completely permitted as a result of reading The Soft Machine and jerking off when I was 16. I never looked back. So that sense of being permitted by DIY culture, punk rock culture, hardcore culture, to make your own material response to culture and to hot rod or customize or personalize your relationship to the world around you, comes to me from punk. But in our case, it's drifted into noise and techno. And I suppose those two poles are really the birthplace of what we do as a band. When I met Martin, I knew that he was in this sort of occult industrial band, and I thought he must be really dark, intense.
And I'm in fact light and happy.
But then it was too late. I was like, shit, he's really cute. I think our common overlap, because anytime like a relationship is starting, we're a couple, we're like totally gay for each other. Anytime a relationship is starting, you have that curious kind of mixtape as seduction, as self-representation, welcome to my, imaginary, and having a 7-year age difference meant that we had very different kind of adolescent imprinting experiences. Martin liked a lot of pot-smoking German space music, which is incredibly hip now. Like bands like Emeralds are all imitating Klaus Schultz and stuff. But at the time, it was way super uncool and made him seem really old. And I think I flogged like Meet Me Manifesto and My Bloody Valentine and Nurse of Wounds.
Who looks better now?
It's not my. You're just aging better. And we started to make music that was drawing on where our musical tastes overlapped. And where they really overlapped was a core set of ideas developed in France in the late 40s. And we basically stole them. We ripped off a bunch of far more talented, far more pioneering, far more brave, far more engagé French composers who started musique concrète. Maybe, have people in here listened to musique concrète? Anybody? Some? Show of hands? Okay, some. So I don't want to be like a pedantic jerk. If you already know the stuff, just be like, yeah. In the late 40s...
They will.
Yeah, they're thinking that already. I can't really control that. In the late 40s, in France, Pierre Schaeffer, his assistant Pierre Henry, started to use tape recorders to gather the sounds of everyday life and to chop them up and to recompose them and reconstitute them into musical expression.
Schaeffer started with turntables, with recording Victrolas, but whatever. Like that's my role here as pedantic. Like,
oh, by the way,
anal point here.
Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And lots of if you go back, there's lots of people who could be the sort of origin of it. There's also Ziga Vertov recording sounds and trying to work into thinking about cinematic montage in relation to sonic montage. So there's a lot of kind of origin myths you can come up with about this technique. I like to go back to Renaissance habits of textuality in which people keep commonplace books where they're essentially sampling chunks of things they like and building them into textual assemblages. So there's a lot of different places where the idea that you can compose by putting together little snippets of found materials get rolling. Sonically, Pierre-Henri, the assistant, the disciple, really creates the most amazing piece that we loved to death when we started making music together. It's called Variations for a Door and a Sigh. And it's the result of spending months and months and months editing the sound of a single creaking, rusty, hinged door in the attic of a French country house. And Henri just worked for hours and hours and hours, assembling, recomposing, manipulating, pitching down, speeding up, doubling, flipping backwards, sending to reverb, taking the reverb, flipping it backwards, stacking it with itself, to produce this incredibly articulate, incredibly beautiful meditation on materiality, on the thingliness of the door. And when you hear it, you're constantly kind of strobing between hearing it as a door and hearing it as this incredibly free and open, liberated plasticity of just sound as sound. And musique concrète in the late 40s was sort of caught in this sticky theoretical problem about, is our music about the objects or is it about pure sound? And you have to remember, this is sort of the dawn of structuralism. This is the dawn of a lot of currents in intellectual thought in France that are trying to come up with these kind of global, powerful structural laws that are going to explain expressivity, matter, etc. So Schaeffer, alas, kind of hitched a lot of the energy of musique concrète to the idea that the source didn't matter, and that really it was about producing a kind of pure, abstract, expressive music that had nothing to do with its source. We, I think, got more inspired by the fact that when you hear Variations for a Door and a Sigh, you are aware of the door. You are aware of the source. And so we started to make...
I think Pierre-Henri did, too. I mean, I think the success of most musique concrète is referential, which is just absolutely opposite to what they were, to what Schaeffer theorized it into.
Yeah, it would have been heresy to say that, well, the point is that you hear the door. And, I mean, I guess Mandy in back there can probably bust us about the reality of what we're saying, but... the portable lesson here is that theory and practice can impact each other in bad ways. You can have a kind of ingrown theoretical toenail that keeps you from expressing what you're really doing, or you can be completely convinced that this theory explains what you're doing, and in fact you're completely wrong about your own artwork, which would, of course, auto-delegitimize everything that we're saying, because we're trying to theorize our own work, but of course we're probably wrong. These are probably defensive fantasies.
I mean, I think the problem with Schaeffer was that he was trying to, well, I don't know. I mean, you know, like, in looking backwards, the problem is that he's trying to convince the French Academy that what they're doing is legitimate. And I think that was the real strangle, was having to convince the Academy and not just following the watercourse way of what they were doing. I mean, they genuinely started something new, but the theory didn't match the practice with it.
And it's kind of a history of the expense of the technology that would allow you to make that music meant that you had to create the myth of some kind of real music, serious music, high art that needed institutional funding in order to happen. I mean, we can afford to sit on the sidelines and be like, funding schmunding, you know, because you can have a few tools and make work on your own terms in your basement. You don't need a research facility. Now. At the time, you really did. And so, of course, musique concrète and early electronic music all gets in bed with the, you know, with big institutions. Radio France, radio stations in Germany, Columbia and Princeton University. You know, there's deep pockets that made these sorts of techniques possible. And you can't think of music outside of that. The interesting story is that there's a lot of musique concrète pioneers and radicals and oddballs who come from another environment entirely, such as this guy Todd Dockstader, who makes insane, amazing musique concrète at night when he's done doing the sound effects for a TV show called Gerald McBoing Boing about a little boy.
Which is in itself amazing.
He's a little boy who communicates through crazy sound effects. So Todd Dockstader has to make like corny, kitschy, you know, bicycle horn noises during the day, and then at night creates these like apocalyptic mind, you know, scrambles. until 6 a.m. So yeah, look for his stuff.
And then wakes up and
Does it all again.
goes boing boing. If you're ever in, the guy who drew and invented Gerald McBoing Boing was faculty at Cal Arts. I can't remember what his name is. Jules Engel, right? Thanks, Mark.
Respect.
Cal Arts.
We like UCLA too. We have some friends that like it. It's all good. Go Bruins. So when we met, we overlapped in the fact that we both liked musique concrète, and we started to make pieces that were very strict about a single sound source and to work as hard as we could with making music out of just one source. And the result was a lot of songs that came out on our first record that we put out ourselves in 1997. I could play some of one of them now.
Why don't you play one of them, Drew?
Excellent idea, Martin. So out of these 4 from our first 2 albums, which do you think we should play, Martin?
Well, the story that we're really good at telling is the one about Verber amplified synapse. So, I mean, like, you know, our presence here is a great case of ex post facto legitimation in that, like, when we were making these things, we were hoping to make, like, techno.
We really wanted to fit into raves, and, like, you got to understand, raves in San Francisco in the mid-'90s involved a lot of, like,
Big
really
floppy hats.
big hats, like a lot of floppy hats. And
Fleur? Does
so
everybody
imagine
know what
like
fleur means?
Fleur,
Yeah.
peace, love, unity, respect.
Peace, love.
And I loved a lot of breakbeat techno, like what was going on and eventually became jungle and drum and bass, and then got really like hard, like a power bar. At the time, it was flexible.
So anyway, wait. So I mean that's what we were trying to do, but we were both also interested in musique concrète. So we were combined these ideas, and we're like, oh, we'll make techno out of funny sounds. So we're out with the I was the equipment manager in the cage at the San Francisco Art Institute, and so I had all these awesome microphones and a portable DAT machine and blah blah blah. So we're out doing a sound safari, which sounds cute. So we're out with our stereo microphone and our portable DAT machine, and we go to a cool place, which is the San Francisco Exploratorium, which is a children's museum. And there's this, like, full revelation here. There's someone else did this work entirely. There's a display that's an amplified crayfish nerve tissue. And you press this button that's, you know, like, we didn't do this. Oh, you press the button and it goes, burn. And we were like, rad. A lot of what we do is just pointing a microphone, in case you didn't notice, pointing a microphone at something and hitting it, or, you know, whatever. And so made a bass line out of it, and built this whatever techno song, sort of.
Why don't we play them some of that and then talk about
it? And then now we'll listen to it. Sorry.
This is when we were trying to be kind of heavy and ravey, so there you go.
And
So the is a loop of the crayfish nerve tissue going through a 4-track that's being fed back into itself, and then I'm EQing it. So that's that kind of constant feedback-like sound is actually the amplified crayfish nerve tissue.
But more importantly than the sound was that we wrote it in the liner notes and in the press release.
And in the title of the song, it's called Verber Amplified Synapse. So we're being really on the nose, incredibly literal. We get all this cred for being conceptual, but I think we're really literalists. We're not conceptualists in the sense that we really kind of hammer, you know, the end user, the listener, the consumer, to get kind of slutty about it with the fact of the source. And the goal here is really to curate the way that information acts upon listening. And to that extent, the work is not the sound. The work is a sort of chain of relationships between the way that information acts on you as you listen, and so you don't hear electronic music that could be cool or not cool depending on
Is
your
it
taste.
interesting for me to say that I play a Roland V synth? Not for everybody, for like, you know, techno nerds, but when you connect it to the body, to nerve tissue, it's like, oh, the body, I have one of those.
Yeah,
You know.
people have this feeling that like electronic music is cold and alienated, and it's this sort of like thing that plays in the lobbies of European hotels or you know, that is used to sell
You're lucky.
perfume. And so I think we got noticed precisely because we were asserting a strong relationship between the source and the outcome, or making some kind of interesting contrast between the source and the outcome. And in the case of the difference between electricity and the body, there's a sort of natural, nice poetics to the idea that electronic music itself is, of course, sending currents of electrons along pathways, but then nerves are themselves exactly that the sort of firing could be a version of the impulses that we sculpt when we make electronic music. Now, we're going to demonstrate for you the way in which the body can be played as an instrument to
take
make
off your
electronic
coat.
music right now. If we could have a volunteer from the audience.
Done. Can you roll up your sleeves, or they? Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, look who it is. See? Isn't that funny?
Nice to see you.
Okay,
So Martin, tell them what you got.
What I have here, Jim, is an acupuncture point detector available from Ronco, from Mco Limited. So it's a cheating device for acupuncturists. And it, hold that in, it measures the conductivity of your skin, how conductive it is at different points. And it just so happens that at acupuncture points, your skin is more conductive of electricity, matching up with those charts they made 4,000 years ago or whatever. How about that, Jim? Back to you.
So, yeah, go ahead. Let's try this. Maybe you could stand up so they could see your body. And maybe cheat out with your wrists. There you go.
Not here. Here. Not here. Here. Nerves, the body, electricity, sound. I was at my acupuncturist's, and I saw this thing, and I was like, "What the hell is that, Joseph? That's cool." And he was like, "Oh, it's a cheating thing. I'm not really supposed to use that." Oh, there's your lung.
Oh, you are sick. You are sick.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Cooking show? Anyone? So anyway, I saw this thing and I was like, man, and I stole it from him. I mean, I was like, can I borrow that? Here we are, like 8 years later, or 12 years later or something. Immediate connection, sound, electricity, the body.
And so what we do,
People love that.
We made a song out of it, and the way that we would play it is that Martin would just play his skin, and I would sample him live, so people would see the acoustically immediate, real event of touching the skin, and then they would hear the sound, and they would establish through him moving around that, oh, there's some kind of correlation, there's some kind of relationship that's causal. As I move this, the pitch is altering. I would then sample that live, and they'd hear loops build up that were obviously played in front of them, and I would start to manipulate that, and then we would fly in the sequence, and that's the more like dirty cooking show style, where you've made a lot of samples ahead of time that sound cool, and you pitched them and adjusted them and tweaked them. And then we play this live piece where the original sound is created, and then it gets sucked into this kind of metabolism of processing and becomes a pop song, you know, with a tempo and a bass line. In fact, We were just playing it in a kind of retro style, because that came out on a record in 2001 called A Chance to Cut is a Chance to Cure. But we were just playing it again, and we realized that it had the same bass line as Beck's The Devil's Haircut, which is a little embarrassing.
Which is a better song.
Yeah, well, different.
We're not Beck.
We're not Scientologists. And, you know, I think that there's a real risk in that work. Like, I like working in this way, and I think working with the real gives you a lot of limitations. It doesn't give you everything. If there's any kind of lie about electronic music that we are given, it's that the possibilities are endless. And you hear this all the time about any sort of digital tool. It's how people sell you these sort of power trip fantasies about the tools that you use, that now nothing gets between your idea and expression. But that's horrible. That's a horrible situation in which there's no resistance. Like a universe without friction, you just fly endlessly into the void. So for us, we like to start with a commitment to a source and then try to grow as much as possible of the composition out of just a single source. The terrible risk with it is that it's gimmicky. It can look really cheesy. It can be like, look, I touched the thing, I make the sound. Do you see? Now it's looping. Everyone.
We were interviewed by a English I don't know what magazine it was, a kid, and he was like, so now you everybody does this stuff, so like why do you still bother?
That shit was cold.
And it was a very good question.
Yeah, it's an important question. I think in part, you know, electronic music has this proximity to design. And as you all know from your own work in design can
How
have
many
a very
of these
fast
people do you think
turnover.
are designers?
Yeah, how many people are design students
Like
here?
design people?
Raise your hands.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
yeah.
some, but not all. And this question of the proximity of fashion and art, and of where are you? You know, is this just a kind of quick turnover in which you're a lifestyle perfume for people, or are you making a record that you want to be compelling 10 years later? For us, it's fucking scary to play and then to do a talk like this and play a techno record that we made in 1997. Why would a techno record in 1997 not just sound insanely dated and tired?
It does, Jim.
In 2010. You know, at this point, we've been a band for 18 years. And we've released 8 albums. And so there is that feeling of like, well, clock's ticking. You know, how many CDs do people really have room on the shelf for? And so you have to, I think, interrogate your process in a deeper way if you're going to presume to continue to have something to say to people. It's an open question and not something that we take for granted. I mean, we're incredibly, insanely lucky that we had this weird skyhook called Bjork that just appeared from out of nowhere and said, you.
I don't think it's necessarily made all the difference, but it certainly helped.
Yeah.
No,
You
I
know-
mean, I think literally it's pure. This is real. It was pure numbers. It's like I think anybody with a decent idea that's put in front of, you know, suddenly times 10,000 potential people who are interested are more likely to go on, as long as the idea is interesting. And you know, that's the terror bird, is like, does it continue to be interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, for us, we had started in a completely DIY way. We put out our own records. We made 1,000 copies. 10 of them were sent to Rough Trade in London. The guy that worked in the shop at Rough Trade gave one of those 10 to Björk. She emails us and said, do you want to do a remix? She liked the remix we did. Then she's like, oh, will you program for Vespertine? I wound up, this made my PhD take 11 years. Because I wound up working for Björk for 4 years as we did 2 world tours and a lot of programming. And, you know, it was an incredibly trusting thing on her part to, like, be interested in us and want to work with us. For us, it was really scary because suddenly you're part of this context where you are being judged on a scale and on parameters that have nothing to do with what you think you're about. Real music. I guess to a certain extent we got contaminated by our contact with Björk insofar as her songs, we had to learn how to play them. And so we had to learn about, like, chord changes and verses and choruses and that structure. We didn't know anything about it. We were like cave people. So suddenly we're in, like, a Björk cover band with Björk. Just means you got a good singer. So And it affected our work because now our work is drifting more towards real music, capital R, capital M. And so we've started to have chord changes, and that's when we call in the really talented people like Mark and Steve who can really play instruments.
Who are like, it's impossible trying to follow you, Martin, because you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, we get in these positions and we kind of look at each other like, when will people realize that we're total talentless charlatan fuck-ups? You know, like just 2 months, or like a month ago, we were playing at
Carnegie Hall.
At Carnegie Hall with the Kronos Quartet.
Yeah, right.
I mean, my mom loved it, you know. But
My dad is just like,
but you know, we set up and they make us drag out our stuff and plug it in, and we plug in Martin's pedal steel and he hits it, no sound. Hits it, no sound.
yeah, I'll tell you, you get to
It's
Carnegie Hall, no sound check. Like, we play in a shitty dive warehouse in Baltimore.
Hours.
Take
of
2
sound.
hours. We really want you to get it right. Carnegie Hall, they give you 30 minutes, they gave us.
Yeah, so we got like sold out Carnegie Hall. They're all staring at us. Kronos Quartet holding their instruments, looking at us. We're just like banging at this pedal steel, no sound. I sort of pray comic style to the ceiling, and then we plug it in again, and it works, and off we go. But it's literally that knife edge of like, when will the universe realize that we have no right?
Where are we going? I mean, you know, the problem with us is I derailed Drew. Like, he had a speech.
Yeah, I did. I had all this sort
And
of.
I'm sorry.
I had all this theoretical
There's fucking
justification.
Gilles Deleuze in here.
Yeah. Well, all right, yeah. Basically, all we do, we make collages. We make compositions. We put stuff together. One fancy pants French theoretical way to describe that is agencement, assemblage. In assemblages, you find states of things, bodies, various combinations of bodies, hodgepodges, but you also find utterances, modes of expression, and whole regimes of signs. It's a handy model for thinking about what we do insofar as the song as a song isn't really the pitches and the notes. It's the way that a set of relationships between an event, a sonic outcome, the processing and manipulation of it, the capture of that in software, the practicing, the reproduction, the dissemination, the cover art, the lecture, are all part of an extended assemblage, which can be understood as something that's mobile, relational, and material. If you want to layer it out, you could say that in the Deleuzian sense, there's both a machinic assemblage of bodies at the level of a material practice that involves finding objects. So I want to make an album out of the sound of medical technology. So what do I have to do? Well, I have to sweet talk surgeons into letting me go into clinics and record liposuctions and record, chin implants. And I have a material encounter with the size of the room. Where can I plug in? How close can I get my mic to the sound of the cauterization of someone's forehead muscles? How loud is the life support? How loud is the air that's pumping through the inflatable blanket that's been laid over the patient that's just had a liposuction? This is an entirely material, time-based encounter. It's an event. So are performances. How completely amazing is the reverb in the center of this room? If you stand right here and go, you hear this dub reggae style pinging, this incredible pinging, because this room has a really, you should do it when this is over. Just come into the center and it's really long.
You can hear it clearly
right?
from everywhere.
So there's a purely material world of bodies, and that is one sort of axis of the assemblage. The other axis of the assemblage is the assemblage of discourse, of enunciation, of turning things into language, manipulating signs. If I record the sounds of bones breaking, it's not an interesting sound. I've heard a surgeon slide a chisel inside someone and break all the bones of their face. That's part of nose jobs. It sounds gross, right? I just told you that in language, and you conjured up an image, and as an embodied person, you felt sympathy. You felt identification, right? But that was all through language. It's all images. It's got nothing to do with the material world of sound, because the sound of the bones of someone's face breaking, totally uninteresting. It sounds like some twigs.
Not even that good.
Yeah, it's like a pencil. I mean, it's nothing, right? So this is an absolute disjunction. And I think that's what's powerful about sound, is that sound does not respect, human cultural values and agendas. There is something other and uncanny about the sonic that is resistant. It's also very cheap. It's everywhere. Walter Murch, the great film sound editor, said that they spent, thousands of dollars trying to create various explosions when they were making the sound for the right stuff.
For spaceships taking off.
They needed this insane sound of a spaceship taking off, and so they spend all this time in the world's best studios or location recordings. Nothing's working.
Setting things on fire and blowing blowtorches at things, and
and this is like one of the greatest sound editing Foley artists in the world. But then they get a shitty punk rock mic like an SM57 and get into a Pontiac and get onto a freeway and just stick a microphone out the window and drive 80 miles an hour. And they get their sound.
And
like
that's
they get
the
their
sound
spaceship taking off sound, which is in the right stuff. So sound is incredibly cheap in certain ways. Like it doesn't map onto our world of values at the level of money, at the level of culture. That's what's compelling, I think, about the tension between the discursive assemblage and the machinic assemblage of bodies. What we try to do is create interesting relationships between the two in which they push or pull against each other. The terrible danger, and it's not something that I could ever resolve or like prove or show, is that maybe all along we only succeed insofar as we succeed because of this. Like what would happen if there was no liner notes, if you didn't know that this was the sound of solid gold coins spinning on a bed of solid silver ingots? Would my beats sound boring?
But I mean, you can go on and on with that. Where is it with Bjork, for example? Like, oh, are these guys interesting? They played with Bjork. Oh, suddenly it sounds better. And I literally think that's true. Like, if someone, I mean, how do we learn about music other than someone telling you, like, no, this record is good, dickhead. Like, oh, you were just listening to it before and you didn't know what it was. No, this is good. Oh, at least that's how I mean,
And
sheer peer pressure.
In the era of,
I guess it was an assemblage of enunciation.
we're in this moment of the discursive saturation of knowingness, insofar as the hipsterization of familiarity with things, of the, like how many hipsters does it take to screw in a light bulb? Oh, you don't know? That music has been completely consumed.
You haven't heard that?
By this.
Now you can tell it.
Yeah, now you can tell it. Music's been completely consumed by this sort of penumbra of coolness that is familiarity, and so we have to ceaselessly download and read everything, and by the time it's just a poor, sad old record in a record store, who cares? Because what you need to do is have already known that it was going to be bad by reading, the Lithuanian rockabilly trance discussion boards, or whatever, So, I do feel that conceptual work in which you claim that the conceptual backstory that produced as its outcome your record or your picture, your art installation, your sculpture, your building, is powerful, is inspiring, but is also incredibly dangerous, because there can be a lot of crap that's passed off as compelling because somebody went to a lot of trouble to secure the raw materials that went into it.
You've never seen that, right?
Yeah, nobody here has ever seen that.
You've never seen any crappy art that was talked up a lot.
So how are we doing for time? Like, what do you reckon? You guys want to ask some questions? Should we shut the hell up? Like, we did already.
How long were we supposed to go?
Yeah,
I mean, because clearly we can go on forever.
Post?
It's 7:30.
Yeah.
Bless you.
All right.
No, stop.
I feel a little weird talking about the more conceptual end of our work, because the concert that we just played was much jammier, as you probably noticed. It was much more of a sort of like flowing set of patterns and rhythms and sounds, but it wasn't so much invested in objects. And our work kind of checkerboards between projects that are driven by decisions about instruments and projects that are driven by a highly conceptual commitment that then drives the work. And we take turns making albums and being in charge of albums, like, because we're a couple and we're like a bitchy, horrible gay couple. who like
I
fight
think
all the
straight
time.
people have the same problem.
Yeah, it's true.
Just guessing.
We actually have to put up a sign now in the studio that says like Drew is in charge of this record, or Martin is in charge of this record, so that if we're about to argue, we'll just look at the sign and be like, oh.
Except
Because
you.
we've gotten into like screaming fights about should there be reverb on the hi-hat, you know, like these like incredibly arcane, minor details, but you're just like, I am out of the band. If that solo is in here, I am out of the band. And taking turns kind of centrifugally means we exaggerate the differences between us. So Martin tends to make albums that are driven by a commitment to play a set of instruments. So we made a record called The Civil War that was mostly acoustic guitars, hurdy-gurdies, real drums, and was sort of a...
But I mean, to pedantically correct you again, it started out being an album about pianos. It was all going to be piano. And we recorded the piano, and the idea was we were going to play the piano, record a bunch of things, make some stuff out of it, tear down some of the piano, and then do what we could do with the piano with the top torn off and some of it exposed, and then tear more away until it was reduced to a harp, and by the end we would have a bunch of songs or a bunch of materials for, and and it was just dead stopped by the fact that I could never get a satisfying recording of just playing the piano.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's hilarious, Martin. I'm sorry, but that's true. And so we ended up recording other instruments that seemed like it went with it, and the Civil War was made conceptual. Afterwards, it wasn't a concept album. It started out with the piano, then we added the other things, and then we realized, like, oh, all these things have this commonality of being
acoustic or folky in some way,
Yeah.
or rural, and of sometimes referencing a kind of English folk that had a like medieval quality, and then sometimes had more of a 19th century Americana quality. And then retroactively, through titles, through artwork, through framing, you give it a shape, and then you get to do interviews where you claim that all along you knew it was going to be that, and it's purely a kind of
even
retroactive.
if you say that it wasn't, they still say that it was.
People
like
want
you can say flat to people's faces, like, this wasn't conceptual and it's totally fake. We named it afterwards. We built this album from, and they're like, conceptual artists do another conceptual thing.
But
it's like we're chained to a gimmick machine that, like,
stop this crazy thing. I am sort of guilty of getting us that rep because I tend to make the most sort of anal, uptight, conceptually driven Matmos album. The one that,
for
we've been
example,
staring at, The Rose Has Teeth in the Mouth of a Beast. I imagined a record that would be, what was happening was we were on vacation in Hawaii, and Martin said, you can't bring your laptops on vacation. And I pouted, of course. But I realized, like, it's true. You know, everything is framed
we
by
all
this.
know
We all know the glowing screen
that
addictive
loser
pattern,
yeah.
right?
That loser is you.
So I brought this book that was by Lucy Lepard on called 6 Years in the Dematerialization of the Art Object, and it's an account of like the early days of performance art, conceptual work, body art, land art in and around New York, but globally. And it kept having these really fascinating photographs of pieces that would just be someone doing a really ridiculous action, but presented very dryly, not in a kind of sensationalistic way, but just in a very sort of flat way. And I found the layout of Lucy Lepard's book really inspiring, and I imagined basically an album. Like, reading her book, I thought, okay, I want a bunch of titles which describe an object being somehow for a person, and then every song will be a biography of that person. And I imagined and drew up this list, and we did it kind of talking together, and we realized maybe let's sort of cut down the frame around it, so maybe let's make it all queer people that we admire in some way. So it's like throwing some kind of party in heaven, like who would you want to go to your queer dinner party in
Has
heaven?
anybody ever heard that song, Hillbilly Heaven?
By Cowboy Copus?
Anybody? Cowboy Copus? Mark? Okay, thank you.
It's this weird, like crazy morbid fantasy of going to hillbilly heaven oh, what a beautiful place, and having dinner with Hank Williams, and it's another sort of version of what this album is. Like, we imagined getting together the set
Cowboy
of people.
Copus is there too, so he imagines his
Yeah, he
own
imagines
death.
himself dead
Like,
and having
and
just-
then there's Cowboy Copus.
Whoa, dude.
Anyway, sorry. Not really related.
And so we built up this list, and the list included, a name and then some kind of sound source. And it gradually expanded. And so what this led us to do was to figure out, well, how can we use someone's life as a frame for a composition? Like, how could we structure a song as a reflection of somebody's life? And in some cases, we would just reenact one event from their life that seemed to us to sort of exemplify their presence or their life or their memory. In other cases, it was a more oblique process. So, for example, we both really love Patricia Highsmith, the suspense writer. We find her fiction just incredibly disturbing and powerful, beautiful, scary. And reading her biography, she's really obsessed with snails. Like, she loved to gather garden snails. She's a butch dyke who would show up at a party with this huge purse, and everybody would be like, why does Pat have a purse? And then she'd open it up, and there'd be a head of lettuce with 200 snails inside eating.
See?
And she would smuggle rare snails from France back to her home when she was living in England by hiding snails in her bra. And I love the idea of someone sitting for a 6-hour train journey, just feeling these slimy trails moving around her breasts. So we thought, all right, we've got to do this. We've got to make a song with snails. But how do you get snails to make sound? Because they're really quiet. They don't. They're
Snails really are quiet.
Yeah, they're really quiet. And we're not gonna crush one or do some shitty, cruel thing.
See, we're not gonna do that. Ooh.
Pat probably totally would, but so we thought of how can we create a situation in which snails are creating sound, and that's when I found on eBay light.
See, there is an advantage to staring at that laptop
Yeah.
all the time.
Light-sensitive theremins. So what we did was we put snails in a glass tube, and then we shot a laser across the glass tube at a light-sensitive theremin.
A theremin, by the way, for those of you who don't know, which are probably 3 of you, but is an instrument invented by Leon Theremin
In Russia.
Russian guy in the 20s, where there's 2 antennas, and one is pitch and one is volume, and the closer you bring your hand to one antenna, the higher the pitch, and the closer you bring your hand to the other antenna, the louder it is.
And the great thereminist was Clara Rockmore, and there's a lot of videos of her playing these incredibly kind of moving and melodic.
Beautiful, amazing voice-like thing, and it's played.
And then there's a lot of corny videos of John Spencer Blues Explosion going, wow, 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 on it, too.
Not interesting.
Anyway, our
So a
snail...
light sensitive. So this cheesy device hardly really a musical instrument,
Yeah.
but it has the same relationship with light. The brighter it is, the higher the pitch, and louder. They combine the X and Y.
Yeah, so it's a very simple thing. It's just a photovoltaic cell that converts the intensity of light to a pitch. And so the snails, we had to sit in total darkness and silence and just stare at the snails in this tube and kind of hope that something interesting happened. And sure enough, they really were compelled by the light, and we sort of explored it and would slowly slide up the glass and kind of go with one of their stalks, and every time they would do that, it would affect the pitch. And so we got this incredible kind of sick theremin solo by taking the 40-minute progress of these snails and just speeding it up massively and layering it with itself, and then it produces this crazy kind of screaming synthesizer jam where the snails were playing the theremin. Then you sort of push off from that, okay, well, what instrument is maybe shaped like a snail? So we thought, well, French horn. So a friend's babysitter played French horn. So we got her to play lots of French horn parts, and then we took all the books by Patricia Highsmith that I own and had Martin play them with jazz brushes and just kind of caress them. And then we thought about, well, what instruments are sort of...
It was the size of the, we're going to go through this. It was the size of the books laid out on the table. I went with the brushes, and it went... And I was like, oh, it's like...
And it sort of established this noir
And it
pattern.
just did it. When I laid the dragged the brushes across it, it said to me like, "Oh, David Lynch," or
Jazz,
that,
baby.
like jazz, baby.
Now, obviously, we could have laid out like chicken soup for the business soul, but we didn't. It was Patricia Highsmith. And this is the question of like, is this just pure sophistry? Like, does it matter or not? Does the real matter? Why does it matter that they really were Patricia Highsmith books? And that's, I think, an open critical question about this kind of conceptual work. I think the brilliant parody of this sort of approach was done by a late lamented artist, Jason Rhodes. I don't know if you guys know Jason Rhodes' work, but he once made this fantastic installation that involved what he called the Kevin Costner pickles. And the Kevin Costner pickles are pickles that have been exposed to the complete cinematic works of Kevin Costner. So, when we sit up here in the bright PowerPoint lights and tell you about all this elaborate conceptual work that we did to distill the essence of Patricia Highsmith.
Don't forget the Kevin
Yeah,
Costner
don't
pickles.
forget that the Kevin Costner pickles are winking at you from the corner.
I'll tell you who else is awesome is he won the big British art prize, the Turner Prize, like 5 years ago.
Martin Creed.
Yeah, Martin Creed. You ever hear that guy talk? Who said that?
He did.
You ever heard him talk? He is amazing how he just spins it into like, wow, that is so amazing, and then just destroys the entire thing in like one line, and you're like, oh, you are a total charlatan. Like this is such horseshit. And then he's like, but, and then builds it up again. Man, that guy, what a showman.
I think.
Yeah, but he won the Turner Prize.
Yeah, he won the Turner Prize for turning the lights off and on.
Yeah.
At this point, we kind of feel as if discursively we've been painted into a corner by the reputation that we have for being the kind of like wacky sounds people. And so we did a couple reactionary things in a row. The first thing was to make a record where the rule was no microphones. So no chance of using an object, no chance of using the acoustic, the real, the material world, and purely to work with synthesizers. So for us, this was a real kind of like hands tied behind back, like what can you still do? And it was a real challenge because why give one form versus another? Why be fast versus slow? Why be major versus minor? There was no conceptual kind of grit to grow the song pearl around. And it was really weird to have that kind of freedom. And that was a record called Supreme Balloon that Martin was in charge of.
I mean, one might just say, like, that's what everyone else does.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was a really like, oh my God, electronic band makes record with synthesizers? Whoa, stop the presses. Crazy. But for us, it really was hard, and it led us to kind of pursue these sort of historical genre exercises and pastiches of, the era of Wendy Carlos's music, the beginnings of Terry Riley's kind of extended instrumental meditations, and minimalism as a form. And so, it was a kind of musical record in certain ways that for us took us out of this conceptual habit of finding the most disgusting, creepy, morbid, or perverted thing to make sound with. I mean, I kind of missed the contact Mike Seaman. This was a lot of fun to make. The Rose Has Teeth in the Mouth of a Beast. Now, the project that we're working on that's not done, we're in process, is an attempt to take conceptualism as far as we possibly can, and so to make a record that's causally driven by only concepts, and how to actually do that. And the results so far have involved reenactments of the so-called Gonsfeld experiments into telepathy from the 60s. So what we do is invite people to our house, and they lie down on a mattress, and they listen to white noise on headphones, and we cover their eyes with these ping pong balls cut in half, and we shine a red light in their face. This was all done in the 60s by parapsychology researchers to sort of muffle the perceptual pathways of vision and hearing. This was supposed to open up the weaker signal of telepathy. And I sit in the next room, and I attempt to transmit with my mind the concept of the new Matmos album. And the experimental subjects are being recorded on audio and video, and they're instructed to speak aloud. Like if they see an image in their mind, then they have to describe what it is they're seeing. If they hear a sound, if they hear music, do they hear an instrument, do they hear a rhythm, do they hear, you know, a particular form, and they just describe that. And we take the transcripts of these attempts to mentate, and then they determine what we do. So we're only free to use the instruments that are causally prodded by my attempt to deliver the concept of the new Matmos album with my mind. And I haven't told Martin verbally about the album. I haven't told anyone. The rule is that I have to be absolutely causally responsible for it, and yet I can only push at the world with this concept. I can't do anything but attempt to use my mind to get the concept across. So this is something we're working on now that will be called the Marriage of True Minds. And we don't know when it'll be done. It's been a lot of fun to work on so far. But
I know now.
But we have a rule where if we try to send a thought into each other's mind, then the rule is that we think the phrase creamed spinach. So if I look at Martin in that way, then he knows.
Cream spinach?
Yeah, and it's the same. Like, yes, that is what I was thinking. Yeah, I don't know where it'll take us, and I think it could be it could be where we finally lose everybody. Any more questions? Or
Any questions? We haven't answered any questions.
Yeah, we haven't
Anybody have a question?
Or just talk loud.
Yeah, I'll repeat it. What's your question, young man? Yeah, when we first started doing it, that was rather the rage, and an interesting. It's an interesting conceptual business as well, in a way. We did on our first couple records. There's some David Bowie in there, and there's we were stealing stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of theft in our music.
It was a conscious decision to sort of veer away from that. It's not only done better by other people, but I don't know. It was more fun to use the engine of the ideas to drive it rather than once you hear Peanut Butter Wolf or Kid Koala, that's 15 years ago. Those things were so amazing. It was
yeah, there's incredible auteurism in the selection of appropriation and sampling. When you hear a Jay Dilla or an On-Ra track, you know the kind of sort of thing that they're going to use, and the syntax with which they're going to edit it is going to be expressive. I don't at all buy the idea that sampling is all MC Hammer stealing Rick James and it's so uncreative and yada. I don't buy that at all.
Though that goes on.
On the other hand, it's like being pro or con about scissors. You can make a shitty collage or a really cool collage. It's not the scissors' fault. It's the same with sampling. We've done some pieces where we use dice rolls to determine what stack of records, how many records in, what side of the record, what song. So we've automated it and taken away that choice, so you can't be hipsterish about well, did you notice my samples of Bourbonese Qualk? So it's less about the beautiful soul who has the incredible record collection. Because I think that's where I get a little suspicious about crate digging. And
but we have an incredible record collection. Yeah. Does that? Okay. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. We started by making records, and then people are like, well, when are you going to play live? And at first there was just nothing that we could do that would truly be live. And a lot of electronic music live is just insanely boring.
In case you hadn't noticed.
And I don't mean to say that as if we aren't. Maybe we are too, It's true, you have to reverse engineer a composition and take away the sort of flawlessness of an arrangement. And so what we tend to do is to have a lot of options about how you manipulate a sound and to have a wide bandwidth of a lot of parameters for how you can distort it or tweak it, or in the case of like showing Martin, you know, manipulating the metal, and then I bring in samples of the metal, and then I play rhythms made of the metal, but manipulated so that hopefully you can tell that it can go wrong. You know, like we can be really bad. I'm not saying that we were great tonight, but we can be like really bad. So having a certain amount of risk and having something at stake in live performance is a big part of it.
Yeah, we have done it, and you're damn right. It's like, oh God.
Yeah, I mean, I saw like Matthew Herbert did a great show in Paris that we saw at Pompidou Center where he showed up with just empty samplers and just built everything from like get the audience to sing a chord and sample it. And I thought it was really great. And we were there backstage with this other German electronic musician whom I won't name, who was like, it's so disgusting to show your process like this. It's like having sex in public. Why would you do this? You know, and he was just like completely unimpressed with the fact that, look, I built it up from nothing. So, you know, I think both reactions, I like the vulnerability of performance, and so I think there are great things about that. On the other hand, why, like, if you admire a filmmaker, would you expect the filmmaker to be editing the film up there while you're watching it? Like,
But yeah,
you know,
you're running up a bad tree there.
Really? All right. Well, there's something to be said for making choices, and there's also something to be said for the sort of purity of the moment.
Yeah, we try to take enough risk, though I think we are too cowardly sometimes, and it bites you in the ass, and I think we're a little too risky sometimes, and it is biting us in the ass. We were way too cowardly when we did the Bjork stuff. Possibly understandably, having only played to like 200 people before, when we were like, there'll be 45,000 people at this festival, we were like, yeah, I think we're going to make this kind of bulletproof. And then, sure enough, like 3 months down the line, we were like on stage, like
doing very little,
and
then
now, you know,
trying
like
to look busy.
we didn't give ourselves enough to do. Though, yeah, whatever. That's another story. They didn't want us to take any risks either. Which is
Well,
also,
she did. There's a difference between Bjork and the machine.
Yeah, there certainly is.
I think for us it's been helpful to move to Baltimore because we left a place in San Francisco where there's a lot of money and a lot of laptops and a lot of people with good computer jobs. And we moved to a city that's poor where people struggle and where people, you know, hustle to make $140 and that's their rent for that month. And in the process, we went from a city where laptops were everywhere to a city where people are mostly playing gear that they've salvaged from the junk shops and pawn shops or that they've soldered together themselves. And it's made us
He's not exaggerating.
Yeah, I mean, it's really weird. Like, the Baltimore scene, it's been a test for us of kind of how, like, why do we cling to these kind of sequencer life rafts? There's so much more freedom there. And Martin's a great free improviser, I think. I think I'm kind of still caught in that control freak 90s moment a little bit. So
it's hard for me to, you know, I mean, it's like hard for me to bring the wicked beats, though, you know, it's like, it's that combination that I think is possibly fun. I mean, there's a lot of stuff at issue, like the idea that electronic music is rock music is a category mistake, I think. You know, the idea of listening to people play electronic music standing up with a beer in your hand is really unsatisfying. I think standing up with a beer in your hand is an unsatisfying way to listen to a lot of music. I mean, I think like the evolution of rock and this business of like, there's people talking, so we'll make it so loud that you can't talk. Like, is that really like a way to listen to and make, like, it's a horrible way that music has evolved. I mean, I'm down with loud music and everything, but sometimes I seriously wonder if, like, we don't just do it because that's what we've done before.
I mean, we like the idea of the seated venue. We love being able to play in places like this because it means that dynamically we can get very quiet and go down to just Martin drumming on the railings and people are listening and they're with us and they're here. Of course, the problem is that this kind of frontality this kind of layout is also kind of oppressive. It's kind of alienating. It's not like a sweaty, fun punk rock house party in the basement. You know, like we're Kunst when we're up here and you're sitting in chairs. You know, so there's a power dynamic that maybe we're enjoying, but it might be rather, you know, limiting in other ways. So it's a trade-off.
I like both things, but yeah, I think there's a disservice being done to a lot of electronic music by just simply like removing rock and putting electronic music.
I mean, on the other hand, we just played at Royal Festival Hall with Maurits van Oswald and Carl Craig in London.
Boy, there was a category.
And that was bizarre because it was this completely chugging, like heaving, kick drum, techno rave to all these British people like sitting in chairs.
It's like a beautiful seated theater.
So that, you know, that also was like a weird trade-off.
I mean, they never go to that quiet, like, other place. It's like, you know, it's like sitting in a chair and watching a dance DJ. It's like, whoa, missing the point, people. But, yeah, it's a curious business, the business of doing it live. And, oh, yeah.
A question
I
in the
could
back.
go on forever about anything.
Pass the mic. Or just shout.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Don't be ashamed of imitating the things that you really love in order to figure out how to make them. It's okay to make derivative stuff, to be like, I really love the genre. I want to figure out how to make a dubstep beat. I'm just going to sit here and make a dubstep beat. That's not, like, horrible.
I kind of feel like if you find yourself succeeding too well, that's dangerous.
Well, that's what I was about to say, is like, on the other hand, that can only ever be a part of your process. Like, we tried really hard to fit into the noise scene, and we sent these demos of harsh cut-ups to them, and they thought they were just too silly, and we got a rejection letter. And then we tried to fit in with the rave scene, and we made like kick drums and clap on the 2 and the 4 and the fast hi-hat and the arpeggiating bass line. And we got the rejection letter from them too. It was like, yeah, no, sorry, we don't want that. And when we finally gave up on trying to fit in and really just reflected on, well, what do we...
This is such a like Archie speech, but it's so true.
Sorry.
No, it's yeah, it's true.
It was really a gift that we like failed many times at pleasing other people, because we wound up just deciding, well, like, let's take the things that we really enjoy and let's not be ashamed about the fact that this crowd of people over here are really puritanical about that, and this crowd over here are puritanical about that. And when we put the chocolate in the peanut butter, i.e. when we use the textures of noise music but the sort of syntax of techno, we wound up making this thing that's not noise, and it's not real techno, it's not real dance music, it's not experimental music in the sort of academic sense, that we wound up making what really felt like us, finally.
And it's compelling to 150 people in larger cities. And that's great.
Yeah, it is. It is. I never thought I'd be here 18 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent my life like failing to imitate Brian Eno. And I've done well by it.
In the back?
Hi. Thank you. Can I just ask the nerdy musical question?
Yes.
What is the difference between an object for you and sound object, which is a term you guys have also used?
Right. I mean, it's sort of, there's a sort of hangover from the French theoretical objet sonore as theorized by Pierre Schaeffer. I guess to me, like, an object is anything that emerges from the material expressive universe as sort of separable. So anything that has a kind of thingly separateness could be an object. An object implies a subject, so there's a kind of figure, ground, encounter. It's a phenomenological word for me, but anything could be an object. It becomes a sound object when you register it acoustically and concentrate on its sort of acoustic, I don't want to say image. I mean, it's hard here because we're always using metaphors, right? But the sort of the acoustic capture of an object separates it from its materiality. And so that's part of what is moving and I think ultimately emotional about sampling and about audio is that it's an archive. It's an archive of the real that might be gone, that might be vanished. So there's something memorial about this technology. Memorial insofar as there's something recognizably representational about the acoustic image of a material cause or origin that's now perhaps gone, or perhaps compromised, or perhaps does not endure. So the distinction is precisely one of, it's a philosophical
I did not follow that.
spectrum. Okay, all right, let's start again. Chair, material object, part of a material world of atoms, right? Separable, I can sit in this chair. It's just an object. I can do stuff to it. I could melt it down. I could remove its sort of purposiveness and make it not functional. If I record it as audio, I get the sound of this material object, but not ever purely this object, always this object in a space, in a room this big, right? So is that the sound of this chair, or is that the sound of this chair in this room, right? So it's always a relationship between the separableness of the thingly object and the total spatial surround, right? I get my image of the sound of that object. Once it's on screen in my software, I can start to deal with it in various ways. This thing might get destroyed, might rust, might be thrown away, might be replaced by trendier, cooler, fancier chairs, might become fetishized on some website of alienated bureaucratic furniture. Whatever. But I'm left with my little sound, and I can keep working with that sound and keep dwelling on it and changing it, and it's now just this acoustic remainder, and I might focus.
So is the answer that any object can be an objason, or if you make sound with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that in the process of doing that, you lose the very thing that you thought you had, which was the thing itself, the Ding an sich,
Okay.
the pure materiality. Sound never gives you
All right.
that.
I got. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. I mean, I felt like you wanted to kind of go there, so. Okay.
And I wanted to make fun of you both.
Yeah, sorry, I get highfalutin sometimes.
You'll have to work that out for yourself. But you can buy it in your local record store, which I encourage you all to go to.
Yeah, it's funny. We meet people that are like, I love your music. And we're like, what albums do you have? And they're like, I don't have any albums. I mean, and this is a problem that we tried to invest all this meaning in the artwork, the liner notes, and history has kind of just run us over like a tank, where now there are files and there's names of files, and we live in the era of the successful dematerialization of the art object, right? What was a sort of trendy conceptual art lingo maneuver in the late 60s is now a lived economic reality in which music has dematerialized, become this sort of transferable digital mist. Buying a record was like, picking some art that you were going to look at, that you were going to hang on the wall, this thing that you were stuck with, that you had to pay if you're going to move, right? It's $1 a pound to move a record collection. If you have 4,000 records, which we have, think about what that weighs, what that cost you, right? Now that entire collection could be on a hard drive. No longer is your life crammed with these hideous pieces of plastic crap, yes, but you're also no longer tethering the sound to the total aesthetic package. And so for us, that's pretty heartbreaking, right? Because we bet the farm on the idea that somebody would listen, roll a joint, read the liner notes, get into it. They don't do that anymore. So we're staked on the album, and I think the only thing that we can do is hope that this tactic of calling your synapse, amplified synapse song amplified synapse is that at least the fucking file still kind of gets the point across.
Except that you files lose their names.
Yeah, they can be misrepresented.
I mean, I will say certainly to the youth that I was supposed to give advice to, but I still listen to records that I bought in 1983. I sincerely doubt your hard drive is going to make it.
Young lady.
and that breaks my heart. It's really not just at the end of that sentence, but it's that I love those records, and it breaks my heart to think that in 30 years, well, in the first place, you'll be buying it again, or have bought it 2 or 3 times, or had to steal it 2 or 3 times, but then forgotten about that one and by the time you're, 46, like, you're not going to remember those things, but I remember those things because they're on my, like, I take down the Will the Circle Be Unbroken, which I forget about. I don't have much of a memory, but when I pull out those records, I'm like, oh, yeah, this record, that's awesome.
Yeah, Martin still has the Pink Floyd album that is entirely black on one side from when his house burned down, and everything that he owned was coated in this thick black slime.
Well, it didn't burn down. It was a rug, and it covered everything with this, like, acrylic soot. But the other side is perfectly playable.
But maybe
you won't
somebody...
get that with an MP3.
Well, maybe...
and so on, and so on.
Yeah, this is the part where we just sound really old.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this album came with like a digital booklet that you could turn the page, and it's just not satisfying to me. But I mean, that could be just because what I'm used to is the paper.
Yeah, I mean, what we tried.
I mean, CDs suck bad enough. It's like, and then you took away that too. Like, I don't know.
I mean, we try to kind of give people the TMI that the web is so good at. The web is so good at there's no real estate, there's no material expenditure to write 20 pages versus 10 pages. So the kind of like logorrhea problem that you've no doubt noticed tonight, the web is perfect for that. So it's a good way to disseminate information.
Yeah, we do actually, for each of our albums, until our stupid web provider lost it, like every one of them had like a 20-page fact about it, as well as the line notes. So yeah, I guess we did, but just to expand it even ridiculously further.
The web can be fun for telling lies too. I mean, when we were working on Vespertine, we made all these really retarded mixes of the Björk songs, and then we put them online because the fan community, the Björk fan community, was so into kind of speculating about what will the new Björk album sound like. So we made all these like really kind of questionable, mawkish, fucked up, weird versions and just put them into the bloodstream of the fans because they were enjoying
And then
them.
hilariously, other people made songs that had nothing to do with it and said they were, and named them Björk and Matmos, so that people would download them and they would, haha, you listen to my song. Like,
Gotcha.
which is a weird, it's like, do you win? Like, is that good?
It's like on Chat Roulette when that guy's like, if you turn your head sideways, I win, it's the same.
Enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Thanks for having us.